Hey guys, it's time to Nefis and chill. In this video, I'm going to be talking about a lot of things and catching up on a lot of things that we have not discussed for some time now. And we're going to be talking about PvE raid compositions for Update 32, otherwise known as a Danlands DLC. And as a general forward, we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff. I could probably talk on for hours about all this, but I'm going to try to simplify this as much as possible and not try to ramble on for too long. So just a warning for those of you who keep saying I talk too slow or whatever, because I will need to talk about a lot of stuff. So, and also as another forward, as far as raid compositions go, as far as groups go, as far as itemization and strats and everything, I have to say this because people will call me a toxic elitist like they always do, for whatever reason. I have to say this. Meta is not some sort of evil entity. Meta is not some sort of monster that's hell-bent on killing your gameplay or like trying to derive you of your joy. Meta is something that this community, a large part of the community, has morphed into something abominable or some sort of non-issue issue that they say, you know, whatever threatens the player base for whatever stupid reason. I don't know. But the whole thing about meta is it's about your group. It's not about what the other group's running. It's not about score pushing. It's not about whatever. It's about your group. Whether that is for score pushing, or for clearing, or for strats, or anything. You have to keep this in mind because a lot of players, perhaps including yourself, just want a very straightforward answer. You just want a yes and no. You just want, here's the best setups for the raid comp, run it, and get your trifecta, get your score, get your whatever clear. Probably not a score because most of you don't even push scores, right? So bearing that all in mind, please do think about things now, starting from this point on, a lot more, because there's a lot of changes with Update 32 that you need to keep in mind when you organize for raid teams, depending on how far you want to push it, or depending on how you want to do things. So we're going to talk about things like the critical damage cap, and how that affects itemization of the group, how that affects what class you may bring, how that affects your setup on your class. We need to talk about penetration again. We also need to talk about the basic stuff before we move on to the more advanced stuff, because I still keep getting the same questions from people for even though I referred to them to the first basic guide. So let's do the recap real quick. 4 principles that I laid out in my very first Raycon video years ago. Comfort and safety. What does this mean? Again, it's about your group. With the advent of ESO logs, a lot of groups have, tried to emulate score pushers or whatever. A lot of them miserably fail. Some of them succeed, but it's all about what you want to do. It's also about what you're comfortable with. You don't have to go all out. You don't have to emulate one group. It's all about your group, so think about that. Buffs and debuffs, and this kind of, as you noticed, I cleaned up the spreadsheet, and I will be actually sharing the spreadsheet from now on. Expect the link in the video description below and the comments below. And all buffs and debuffs just refers to, you need to think about the class buffs, which I'll talk about here again. You need to think about, okay, what does each item set potentially bring for what we're doing and for what kind of group we are. You need to think about skills. There's a little note here, skill setups and how they affect your itemization or, how you play. You need to think about that too. Strategy, skills and sets. And this is because we need to talk about this as well, because some content, you're not going to be doing the same thing as you would be doing. For example, let's say you're pushing Veteran Sunspire. You won't be doing things in Veteran Sunspire like you would be doing in Veteran Cloudrest, or Veteran Second Ophidia, or Veteran Rockgroove. So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into things like, well, do I really want to do this dummy part setup on, I don't know, Navi portals, stuff like that, and what kind of classes should we send down to Navi portal? What kind of classes should we send down for a solo portal in VCR? So many things. And of course, most importantly, because this principle has not changed and is the most stable principle, damage. Damage is still king in ESO. Whether that's fortunate or unfortunate, that's up to you. That's debatable. But damage is undisputably king. And by that, I mean the more damage you have, the easier the content. The more damage you have, the more things you can actually pull off. And again, people bring up toxic elitism for whatever reason, but that it is undisputable. You can skip mechanics, you can do a lot more interesting strats with it. The more damage you have, it's more forgiving. The chances of you succeeding or clearing and stuff like that may or may not depend on how much damage you have. For general rules, and I'll bring this up a couple times later on in the video, and we'll also talk about this in relation to the critical damage cap, you'll probably still want at least 3 horns and 3 colossi running in your raid team or content. Saxleos is still a very strong consideration as a set because that does affect not only your horn order but also your major force uptime. And of course, we talked about this at length, I believe, in update 27 about raid composition, player load. Try not to put too much on one player. I still see some raid teams trying to put way too much on one player. I see groups putting their EC Crow and MK with Ice Staff Riddle. And that's not very good. That's not very good. You want to spread some responsibilities out. It may make sense on some level to think, okay, we should just have everybody damage, but just one person do everything. Well, it's not going to exactly work out as you think it will on paper. But yeah, please take that into consideration. So let's talk about class buffs. Dragon Knight still got Stagger from Stone Giant, Minor Brutality from casting an Earth and Hard skill, Engulfing Flames, and this could be on the tank or DPS still, Igneous Weapons, and this is really only for groups running Heroism pots for score pushing or something, or specific strats. Nightblade, really the only thing it really offers is Minor Savagery. One little minor note about Nightblade is, it can give Major Breach to Reaper's Mark, which is pretty useful for places like, Sunspire, Navintas, Hardmark Portal. You need a source of Major Breach down there on the Eternal Servant. Necromancer. So Necromancer has Major Vulnerability. Really, really important debuff to have in a raid to do that damage, right? And also as Empower, or Empowering Grasp. And still very, very useful support skill. Templar. The Minor Fracture and Breach has kind of gone down in value because you get that from Pierce Armor, from tanks running Pierce Armor, the Sword and Board taunt. But at the same time, you still need a Templar if you're going to run a Magicka DPS composition like Minor Sorcery. Or maybe there's other reasons, depending on the patch, where you'll be running a Templar. Warden, Minor Toughness, Major Resolve. Major Resolve comes from the Expansive Frost Cloak. Can be pretty significant for pretty much any kind of group. Minor Toughness is really, really nice. Really, really nice post CP 2.0. And of course, I don't think you'll be running Eben anymore in raid comps. Sorcerer, Minor Prophecy, Crystal Weapon. The Crystal Weapon is mainly there as an alternative option for Stam groups if they lack the penetration. We'll talk a lot more about that. But the Minor Prophecy is a big thing for Magicka DPS comps. And of course, let's talk about composition categories. There are 3 composition categories as of update 32, or pretty much kind of has been throughout the years of ESO, as far as back as I can remember, like since 2015 at least. So Magicka, the Magicka DPS composition is defined by a raid comp or raid team that's purely Magicka DPS, so 8 Magicka DPS, or 9 depending on how you're doing things. So as of update 32, right now, I'm going to tell you, very easy answer. It's not only viable, it's very optimal. Perhaps the most optimal at the moment. Hybrid comps. Hybrid comps are a very interesting story. From update 30 until up until this patch, which is through update 31 to update 32, hybrid comps weren't just viable. They were at times optimal. Although this has been phased out in update 32 due to the various changes with the patch in regards to the hybridization of sets, in regards to the critical damage cap, and so forth. But what a hybrid composition is it's a mixture of stamina and Magicka DPS. The predominant DPS being, historically speaking, stamina. And last patch, there was at least one world record achieved by hybrid comp. Score pushers were trying out hybrid comps. So that was more than viable, that was optimal, but I think after update 32, we're going to start seeing a move away from hybrid comps for sure. And kind of go either way to Magicka or Stamina. So this is the biggest question, because I've been, talking a lot about it, and my opinion about it has not really changed. Stamina comps have, since Dragonhold, since 2019, not been in a huge advantage, obviously. Because I think a lot of new raiders have never been played Stamina. So they're very skeptical of, is Stamina coming back? But little do they know that in throughout history, in 2015, 2017, 2019, Stamina DPS comps were actually meta. And as usual, you know, because I've experienced it and seen it, as usual, people are very reluctant to change or try out new things. It's going to take players a while to try, different compositions, play styles, and so forth. And I would say it's not just viable, but in specific scenarios right now, it's optimal. It's comparable to Mag, or at minimum, with barely little testing so far in this patch, at minimum, it's very comparable to Mag, or almost equal to it, as far as I've tested, as far as I've kind of thought about and seen. And we'll talk more about why you probably won't still see stamina here in a bit. But anyway, as far as stam is concerned, going up post update 32, it's probably going to be very, very, very group and content dependent, more so than Mag is. Meaning the group has to be willing to put in the work, has to be experienced with stam, and also experienced with the content to pull it off as easily as they're doing that with Mag. Content dependence will mean basically, well, probably stam is not that great for some things like Cloud Rest still compared to Mag, but it can still probably compete with Mag in VHOF and so forth. So score pushing, let's talk about score pushing, because assuming stam is about equal to Mag, people will still go with Magicka. And there's several reasons for this. The first reason is obviously comfort. Even score pushers are comfortable, have that level of comfortability that we talked about, earlier. It's familiar. You don't really need to change much. The second reason is, even if they're equal and the Mag is, easier to organize, why would you swap to stam? The third reason, no one's still sure. There's barely any testing going on with stam. There's like maybe 2 or 3 groups worldwide, maybe 4, trying out stam for trifectas, not even score pushing. So there's that factor as well. So until it's very, very, very clear, like we're talking about a huge difference, or maybe a much more noticeable difference, score pushing groups will probably still stick with Mag. But I suspect that we're going to start seeing a swing back to stam depending on the changes with update 33 or whatever comes after that patch. Because there are definitely a few things stam does need in terms of ease of access, not just in terms of penetration, but also in synergies and itemization still. But as of this patch, it's gotten a little bit easier, and I'll talk about that right now. So let's talk about the crit damage cap. The crit damage cap is new. It's basically a cap on your modifier. So right now, most players have 50% base crit damage. Well, every player has that, and then you can add that up to 125% crit damage modifier. So things like, let's say, things like EC, minor brittle, or fighting finesse, and medium armor passives, and all that. This is just tack that onto the value of the base crit bonus, as you can see here. And this is something you have to think about as a player and also as a group. What are we going to run? Should we run it? Like, for example, here, this is my stam DK values. Assuming we have minor brittle in group, assuming I'm running fighting finesse, I have major force with a 70% uptime, I have minor force, and I have 6 pieces of medium armor, assuming I have 1 piece light. Shadow's useless, so don't bother running Shadow at the moment. And am I running Harpooner's Waiting Kilt? If yes, then I'm going to have 134% crit damage, or the average of 111%, so I might need a bit more. So you have to think about this, because you have to think about this not from your own itemization perspective, but also the group perspective. Should you run EC? Should you run minor force if people are running EC? Should you run EC in the group? Also, what class are you? Are you a Nightblade? Are you a Khajiit? And I'll make a separate video in regards to penetration and also Khajiit versus Altmer. But, this is something you have to think about. And just as a brief example, let's say on my stam DK for Rockgrove, which I've been making videos about, and I just published the video with the world's first stamina clear of Rockgrove hard mode. For stamina DK, I'm not a Stamblade. I'm not a Khajiit. I'm not a Stamcrow. Let's say I don't have Harpooners. I'd probably run minor force, fighting finesse, and backstabber, assuming brittle is covered, and of course I have 6 pieces of medium armor. But if I do have Harpooners, but the situation isn't very great with uptimes, then I'll probably still run Minor Force Fighting Finesse Backstabber. What about very easy, fight? Well, if I'm wearing Harpooners and it's an easy fight and I can keep it up, then I can just do Minor Force Backstabber and kill. And that's it. I don't need the Fighting Finesse. So, with all that said, excuse me, you have to think about the crit damage cap. I will have the link in the spreadsheet here to this calculator. It's very easy. All you have to do is input the things you have on your character and the things your group has, and just look at your crit damage modifier. Alright, and of course the crit damage modifier will affect itemization. I keep talking about itemization quite a bit because it's a big deal right now. Support itemization, everything under here, under this category, is mainly used by support roles or support players in your groups. There's a total of usually 3 or 4 support players at a time in a 12-man raid. So Roaring Opportunist, Powerful Assault, Worm, Hurricanes, Tremor, and Kratos, Defiled, everything. Some of it will be shared across both STAM and MAG, some of it will not be. DPS itemization, I mean, there's so many sets right now, because the hybridization of supposedly STAM and MAG sets have led to both MAG and STAM using the STAM and MAG sets, or traditional MAG and STAM sets. So it's very interesting to see where the game is going with that. However, there's still clear winners, and the clear winners are listed here. There's a video made by Skinny Chicks in regards to the best monster sets and stuff like that. These are just kind of the things I've seen people test and raid and also have good results with. For example, we have Stormfist. It's proven to be a very, very solid raid option. Velodreth for cleave. I've also seen, for example, one slime crawl with another one crit piece being used at times on MAG. I've had to use one Crag as a STAM DPS depending on the situation. Also, we do have other 5-piece sets. Mechanical Acuity, I think, is not a lot of people are testing it or using it, but I think it's actually going to be considerably strong in specific trash pulls. Trash pulls that would last, a bit, not too long, but also not too short. So it might be perfect for VHOF, might be perfect for Rockro, so gotta think about that too. We also do have these numbers next to like Azure Blight and Kionars indicate only one person can run it in the group. So let's say two people are running Azure Blight in trash fights, probably you should delegate that to just one person. Kionars is a single target monster set. You should probably delegate that to only one person in the raid, because only one instance of Kionars can hit a target at a time. We also do have weapons of note, especially for STAM, like Maelstrom Bow. Black Rose Bow is making an appearance here. We also do have Advancing Yoke that are being used by both STAM and MAG, and a lot more. So you can head to the ESO Discord for specific setups, or look around in public logs or something like that, or ask in the YouTube comments below for various setups. I'll also be making my own STAM and MAG DPS build guides for this patch. And of course, the shared category just means, DPS or support players will probably use these sets depending on the situation and depending on the comps and depending on the setups. So for example, Zen, that can be used by a healer or a damage dealer. Martial Knowledge, kind of the same thing here, although I suspect that Martial Knowledge will either go entirely on support for specific content like VA as hard mode, or it's going to go on the DPS entirely for most content because of a few changes that I'll discuss in regards to, well, let's just discuss it right now. So Martial Knowledge is kind of hard to keep up with the changes to Bash. In the Update 32 patch notes, a lot of people kind of skipped over the Bash, and I'll make a video about it too. The cost of Bash has gone considerably down, like incredibly down, to the point you can't exactly keep up a consistent uptime of Martial Knowledge just by keeping your stamina with Bashes. So the very unique and I think interesting solution, because I also brought it up to an extent with my recent 4-man Warden Tank build here, is you probably want to put Spotter on with Martial Knowledge, and I think we'll see some great results here. So Elemental Catalyst is also something that can be shared between a damage dealer or a healer, or a tank. But I think most reliably it'll probably go on a damage dealer in MAG, and not picked up at all in STAM, because Stamina can now afford to drop either Elemental Catalyst or Minor Brittle. We also do have Master Architect and War Machine. This can be used interchangeably between supports and DPS. Ring of the Wild Hunt and another mythic or two can probably be shared between damage dealers and support players. For example, damage dealers can probably slot Ring of the Wild Hunt when there's like no fights that are going to happen and there's just long passageways and you can just swap to a different setup. But that's more for PC because, you know, console doesn't have the dressing room wizard wardrobe add-ons. But still, probably Ring of the Wild Hunt is probably good for tanks in specific content. Morrock Tong is also something going to be pretty interesting to see. I think Morrock Tong, depending on the itemization of your stam DPS group, is going to go on a DPS for most fights. And now let's talk about penetration. And hopefully I haven't lost any of you by now. I probably have. Penetration, as you can see, is not very balanced between both stam and mag. And this is part of the reasons why people have kind of been afraid of going to stam. You can see here that, hey, okay, mag and stam pretty much share the common things, assuming that stam has at least 1 or 2 light armor pieces should they be able to sustain it. They don't really need things like Maw. The Maw is kind of there for class or trash situations. So for example, I'd probably run Maw on my stam DK for trash. Or a Maw on my Stamden for trash. But for Stam Blade and Stamcrow, probably I would not be running a Maw for trash. So this is not a list of all the things you need for your Stam. Far from it. This is just a list of penetration numbers, such as Nightblade, Necromancer, Crusher for signatory fights. And I'm going to talk about this here right now. And it's pretty important that you pay attention to this. So Crimson Alkosh. I don't think Alkosh is really worth running in Stam comps anymore, although this means we can just pick up Crimson Oath's Rive, which does give us a 3,541 penetration value. And the reason why Alkosh I don't think is worth running in Stam on either the tank or DPS is because, well, on this Stam composition, and this goes back to what I said earlier about a couple issues with Stam still, is a lack of synergies. So probably not a very good idea right now to try to do Alkosh and Stam comps. But even without Alkosh, you can still have Crimson Oath on boss fights, on trash, and you'll still be fine as long as you have Tremor Scale and all these other debuffs. Of course, let's talk about Magas here as well. Obviously, very significant difference in terms of penetration needed. And this is also because Mag is going to be running at least 4 light armor pieces, maybe 5. Depending, or maybe 6, who knows? But depends on your setup. So that's gonna be a huge factor into why Stam needs a bit more penetration sets, and we'll talk about how to organize these sets, because I think part of the reason why people don't want to run Stam is because they just don't know how to itemize Stam. DPS CP, pretty straightforward. Master at Arms, Biting Aura, Thaumaturge, Deadly Aim. Things you also have to think about at this point too, right? I mean, while you, like, if you're Mag, you have light armor. Maybe you have 2 medium armor pieces as well, and you have harpooners and stuff like that. Do you really need both Fighting Finesse, Backstabber? If you're assuming you're going to run EC, Mag comps will probably still run EC. So what you need to think about this, right? And do you really need Backstabber and Veteran Sunspire? You can't flank the dragons, so you need to think about that as well. And the goal here is to get 18,200 penetration, or as close to that as possible for either Stam or Mag. There's a few notes down here I want to talk about too. Because people keep asking me about it for some reason. Vampirism, Lycanthropy. Is Werewolf good again? No, Werewolf is not the best. I mean, it's viable, but within the context of what I'm talking about right now, in terms of optimizing things, no, probably Werewolf is not very optimal. Vampirism, is that optimal? Probably in some cases. They did kill Mistform, and I made a separate video about that if you want to go watch it and why they did it. But long story short, I think the only 2 possible good applications of Vampirism for PvE, or as far as raiding goes, is still Simmering Frenzy, which is, you know, killing yourself for a higher weapon and spell damage, but also Exhilarating Rain, which is ulti-gen. A lot of people tend to forget about this. I think this has a huge application in fights with downtime for tanks. Things like Cloud Rest, things like AA. So definitely need to keep Vampirism still in mind. Just because it's not, you know, you're not going to use Mistform and Rockruff doesn't mean you should probably cleanse Vampirism. Weapon setups, enchantments, we can talk about this all day too. So just very brief summary. Magicka DPS will probably go Dual Staff, or Staff and Staff, or Inferno Staff. Stam DPS will probably go, depending on the situation, they have a lot more variety. They'll go 200 dual wield for single target. They could do dual wield front bar with 200 back bar, 200 front bar with dual wield back bar. They could also do dual wield, 200 bow. They could also do bow if they need more cleave or they need more trash damage, depending on where you can use bow. I'll talk more about that in a bit. Skill setups and how they affect your itemization. We kind of talked about that. I mean, for example, you need to think about this. What you need to think about this. So I think an easy one here is, why do you not need IA anymore in 2021? I mean, you have so many sources of minor vulnerability now, right? From things like Warden, Sork, whatever. You also do have other things that you need to think about in regards to class and skills. For example, if you're going to run a DK tank, why are you running a DK tank? Are they there to provide stagger? Probably. I think that's why you'll see here soon that DK tank is universally shared between Stam and Mag. Alright, now that I've talked long enough about things you guys probably don't care about, I'll talk more about Mag, Stam, and where they stand a bit more. So again, since the Dragonhold patch, stamina DPS rate compositions fell out of favor due to the loss of cleave damage, the armor passive changes, the prominence of Mag DPS support setups, such as Zen's Redress, that's Mag, Elemental Catalyst, that's Mag, Martial Knowledge, that's kind of Mag, right? That couldn't easily fit into the rate itemization, in conjunction with their desperate need for penetration as time went by. Because if you lack penetration, what do you need? You need Alkosh, you need Crimson Oaths, you need something that gives you penetration. But of course, if you're going to take on Alkosh, you're going to take on specific item sets, while Mag keeps gaining penetration innately through light armor and stuff like that, well then your itemization is going to get rough, and that's a huge part of the reason why people don't want to try a Stam, or think Stam is dead. It's not dead. Also, people think, this is a common argument that I see on YouTube comment sections and Discords, that people think Stam doesn't have cleave. But recently, at least starting with Update 29, a lot of aspects of Stam DPS started getting slight buffs, including cleave. And the DPS gain from that, along with other things to specific classes, such as Stam Crows, were certainly noticed, which was why, like I said, people were trying out hybrid comps. People were trying out if Stam DPS was worth it, and they are worth it. Right now, for most people watching this video, you can probably take a Stam DPS into raid, underpenned by 9-10k, and still outparse somebody who's Mag DPS. I've certainly done it, and I'm not even a good DPS. So there's definitely been a large noticeable gain. So the question is not really about, is Stam DPS good, but is Stam DPS comp manageable, or is it worth it compared to Mag? And again, I explained earlier why score pushers probably don't think so. But yeah, let's talk about the specific examples here. And also, people will probably bring up the crit damage cap as another reason. So this was kind of a blessing and curse for Stam DPS, because the crit damage modifier cap also allowed the Stam comps to drop EC or Brittle or something like that, which slightly relaxed the itemization strain, but at the same time, at least min-max wise, that kind of made, for some people, Stam DPS less desirable, especially when you have Base for Mag, which is another huge factor that we can talk about. But even with the little testing, as I mentioned before, done as of this patch, I think at minimum, Stam comps are still very comparable. We're still getting very comparable times in Rockgrove to people still doing the Planesbreaker prog on their Mag comps. So they're like, Stam comp right now, Ox can definitely get a sub 4 minute, definitely a sub 7 minute Base without score pushing it, definitely a sub 7 minute Zalvaka, and other Mag groups are around that range, we're in that range. So it is comparable, if not equal to. And of course, there was a world's first VCR +3 Stam Zero Portal recently, back in Update 30 with Bread's team. And this is all Stam. They just burnt VCR Hardman without killing Reliquid and Gallonway. So the possibility is there But nobody wants to test things because people are either too timid or people just don't think it's worth it. But fortunately, we have some people testing it, and that's good. And I think, given time and a few more changes, Stam will probably come back in full swing. But anyway, Magicka comp, let's look at the examples here. So I'm just going to give like really general examples. These are not templates for you to use, but they can be close to maybe an optimal setup, maybe not. That's up to you to decide. So for example, we talked about, DK tank. Well, guess what? You'll probably have a DK tank in your Magicka comp. Why do you need a DK tank? Stagger. Engulfing Flames maybe, or most likely stagger igneous weapons if you're gonna run heroism pots. You're gonna have a Warden or Templar or Necro tank. Assuming you choose one of these, that will obviously invalidate one of the two other support choices, which will be a Warden Templar or Necro Templar. And right now, you'll probably run 3 Necros. Remember, one of our general rules: you want 3 Colossi with at least 3 horns. So you have a Necro support and 2 Necro DPS, most likely for Magicka DPS compositions. And of course, everything else is filled in by whatever you need or whatever you want. Mag DKs are in vogue right now. Mag DKs seem to be one of the best parse classes in general, alongside Mag Blades. But whatever, this can apply to any patch, really. You don't have to think about specific classes right now. You just have to think about what's the hardest hitting class possible. And also, do they hit really hard, not just on the dummy, but also in that specific raid? For example, somebody asked me the other day, oh, how do you, would you send a macro solo portal VCR, or would you send a Mag DK solo portal VCR? And I mean, the obvious answer is you're gonna send a Mag DK. So you need to think about that when you set up your group. Is it the best for the content, not just the best for the dummy? But right now, I believe, from what I've seen, Mag DKs are pretty damn good. So Mag Trash setups example. I'm gonna have a large focus here on support itemization, because support itemization, if you figure the support itemization out, you pretty much have everything else covered, no matter the patch. If you have the support itemization figured out, you can figure out DPS very, very easily. Support itemization, again, includes here, right? You need to think about things like, do we need to have Brittle? Maybe. Do we need to have powerful Salt and Trash? Yeah, probably. It's free. It's basically free. Do you need Kratos for Mag DPS comps? Yeah, everyone's doing Firewall and shit like that, right? Do you want the Pearls of Enelfate? Do you want Sax on one of the supports? Do you need Alkosh for Mag? Maybe. So you gotta think about all this, right? But just to give a brief example, for example, the DK tank or whatever tank can run Crimson Yole or Yole PA or whatever they're doing at the time. One of the supports can run Spotter. I would not recommend a DPS to run Spotter just yet in the trash setup, and I'll explain why. In Kratos PA, Sax, as long as you have the core setups or core gear sets covered, like Yonakrin gives Minor Courage, Sax gives you that really strong option when you're ult rotation and major force uptime. You have Symphony of Blades for sustain for the group. How are you going to organize Major Slayer uptimes? Major Slayer comes from many setups or many sets. Comes from Roaring Opportunist, comes from Master Architect, comes from War Machine. How are you going to set that up? Right? Are you going to run Master Architect on both healers? Are you going to have one tank in War Machine with one healer in Master Architect? There's so many variables and things here because this also will depend on the content you're doing. For example, if one tank's running ahead, well, you need to decide which tank's going to stay with the group tanking the previous trash. You also need to think about, well, if this tank right here is running ahead, well, we're missing PA. So would you want to put PA on the healer, or do you still want to put the PA on the tank that's running ahead? You gotta think about this. And for, I'm gonna make a brief mention of it here. Azure Blight for both Stam or Mag, and of course I have a shared column here if you guys want to look at it, of at least some of the item sets are shared between Stam and Mag here. Azure Blight is gonna be shared between Stam and Mag comps. Azure Blight is a very strong set to have in trash at the moment, has been for a little bit. And again, just a reminder, one person should run it, only one person should run it. Boss setup example, very brief example. In Kratos, Yole, Sax, or something, depending. Off tank, at this point, you have so many options. Like, let's think about what your group is doing. Are you score pushing? Are you doing a trifecta? what's going on? If you're score pushing, you're gonna have a lot more options here. If you're just doing a trifecta, well, maybe you go more safe sets. Instead of, like, are you gonna score push with, 4 supports, but one support goes DPS, or they're not really gonna have a support item set? Are they even gonna have Ari or Volds? Or are you gonna split, again, like you did with Trash, between 2 people, MA. So there, again, no easy answers here. However, in regards to support itemization or support DPS itemization, to help you figure out things easier, we have EC, MK, and Zen. So these 3 things, I think for most content, except maybe VA's hard mode, will probably be on your mag DPS. EC, MK, Zen. And we talked about MK being very hard to keep up with the batch changes. So probably the spotter with its Kiss Curse effect of lowering your mag and stam reco per person it applies to in terms of the weapon and spell damage it grants. It's going to be really good with MK. So this is the reasoning here. And of course, shared. And before I move on to that, general par setup. People keep asking this. It's really annoying in the ESO Discord. But Base Kinraz, Harpooners, Maelstrom, Staff, and you're done. You can have like monster sets like Kyonar, or any of the monster sets that's listed here. Ice Heart Situational, if you want to play safe. Or you can do Zan, depending if it's a single target fight. Grothdar, if it's an AoE fight. And if you're the lucky guy running Kyonar, you run Kyonar. Very easy, very simple. Again, a lot of this is shared between both Mag and Stam. So let's move on to Stam, because Stam is the more interesting part. And this is actually where I want to help you guys. Because it's not hard. It's just maybe a couple extra sets or 2. I mean, a couple extra sets you have to think about, and that's really it. But a very general example here is a DK tank. I mean, exactly the same as Mag Comp. A Warden or Templar Necro tank. Oh wow, what a surprise. Warden or Templar healer, and a Warden or Templar healer. So it's basically the same as Mag. You just need to make a decision between, okay, well, why do we have a Necro support? Probably for empowering Grasp, right? So all these things you have to think about. So that's your basic support lineup. 2 Stam Crows. Now, the general rule here is you still want at least 3 Colossi, yes? So that's why you have 2 Stam Crows in addition to a Necro support. But here's where things get really interesting for Stam compared to Mag. The top 3 parsing classes so far is Stam and the Necromancer, Stam and the Nightblade, and Stam and the Warden. Stam Crow class-wise is still very, very, very strong. Probably hits on the same level or as harder than Stamblade. Stamblade is very strong as well, and again, this will depend on content. And I'll show you a real actual example. So this is the logs from the recent Planesbreaker Prog group I joined. So I'll just show the general example, or the general comp. We have 3 Stam Crows, 1 Stamblade, 1 Stamplar, 2 Stamdens, 1 Stam DK, with a Warden healer and a Templar healer, with a DK tank and a Necro tank. Alright, if I was a raid lead, and we were like, I wanted to score push or something like that, I'd be like, what the fuck is this raid comp? Alright, I tell this DK to leave. I tell this Stamplar to leave. I probably tell these 2 stand-ins, we can probably make up for your cleave from shots. I'll probably just do all Stam Crows in, or like half Stam Crow, half Stamblade, because you also take into mind, Zavaka, or like a lot of these, all 3 of bosses have very long executes, comparatively speaking, to in terms of their health bar. So Stamblade would not be a bad option here, right? So you gotta think about that. But yeah, this would be a general optimal setup for Stam comp. You can do, fun stuff like this, but this is probably not very optimal in terms of setup. And let's talk about trash setups. It's basically like Mag, but with a couple things different. So you do require penetration through Minor Breach, AoE Minor Breach. It's very nice. 2,974. Mag doesn't really need the Minor Breach if you're going to be running, Crimson or something like that, most likely. So you don't really need the Foul Dragon most likely for a lot of mag encounters, more mag DPS comp encounters, but you'll probably still need the Minor Breach for stamina DPS rate comp encounters. So that's why we have the Foul Dragon, we still have Crimson. Again, depending on what's going on, do you want the spotter in the group on the healer? Do you want the spotter on the tank? Where the tank's going? We have Yonakrin, Sax. Monster sets can vary between Tremor Scale or whatever is needed. For trash, I wouldn't say you need Tremor Scale if you look at this chart here, because that penetration can be made up for very easily compared to the boss setups we'll talk about. We have Symphony still. Where are we gonna get our Major Slayer uptimes? And this is also sort of a weakness of Stam, even though despite the weakness, Stam's still pretty up there with Mag at the moment. But Roaring is going to be a source of Major Slayer. If you decide to split the Major Slayer uptime between two people with War Machine or Master Architect or War Machine, depending on what you're doing, personally I think that's a DPS loss, but you can experiment. I would say probably Roaring PA on the healer staying in the group. And of course, just like the Mag group healer, you can be running things like Symphony, or depending on if the tank's not running in Spotter with Sax, Pearls, or whatever. You also need a major courage source, like Olo or SPC. For trash, Olo's pretty good, because everyone's running in a linear fashion. Morag Tong is going to be present in trash. So unlike the Mad Comp, they don't need Morag. Morag Tong is going to go probably on a Stamcrow or anybody at that point. Azure Blight, again, still makes its appearance on the Stam comp. And for your trash setups, you'll go two-handed bow or bow and bow. Bow and bow with Acid Spray, Endless Hail, Caltrops, even using a Mystic Orb on Stam is very on par with Mag Cleave. Like, it's actually insane. And two-handed bow, that's going to be situational. For example, in Rockgrove, I found that bow is not that great after boss 8 because of the, or not that great after Ox itself because of the nature of the trash there. For example, you have to back up and hit them at a certain range with the bow passive to get the most damage out of your bow, but you can't really afford to be too far away if the rest of the group's not doing, bow, or maybe you can still do two-hander. And two-hander with Masters and Carve is pretty insane at the moment. Stand boss setups. Again, general setup here. Tremor, Crimson, Yonakrin. The other tank, depending on what's going on, can also do Tremor scale or Loraden or any monster set, or maybe a mythic like Spotter or Ruin, PA, Sax, whatever. And again, just like the Mag Comp, one of your supports has variables here depending on if you're score pushing or depending on what you're doing. But you still need the source of Major Courage like Olo, and MK Zen I think could probably become a thing, but I think mainly it's going to be confined to VAS hard mode. But otherwise, the main issue here now is your Major Slayer uptime, Roaring your Volds, or if you want to delegate that or split that between two War Machines or something else. And here we have the exact same thing as Mag does, except without EC. So what's replacing EC here is going to be Morag Tong to buff the poison/disease damage. We also do have MK Spotter, most likely within the group on the DPS. We also do have Zen on DPS, and it doesn't have to be a Zen Stam DK like I'm doing. It can be a Zen Stamcrow and still hit pretty hard. For your parse setup, it's gonna be like what's very affectionately referred to as the 5-2-2-2-1 setup, meaning you have a primary 5-piece like Reliquant, you have 2-piece weapon crit or critical chance like 2-piece Sogman, you have 2 arena weapons like BRP Dual Wield, specifically the BRP Dual Wield. You have a 2-piece set in the form of a Maelstrom Greatsword, and of course your mythic 1-piece is a Harpooners typically. So this is a typical parse set, Kalanar with Reli, Sogvan, BRP Dual Wield, Maelstrom Greatsword, Harpooners. This is a two-hander / dual wield or dual wield front bar / two-hander back bar setup. If it's a BRP dual wield front bar, it's gonna be for certain classes, charge precise or precise Nernhund, or charge Nernhund, depending. And on the back bar, it's going to be infused. And if it's a BRP dual on the back bar setup, it's going to be infused on both, and it'll be specifically daggers, no axes, because axes are really bad. Because of the crit again, this comes back, crit damage cap. So something like that. Both infused daggers on the back bar with fire and poison enchant. And you know, that fire enchant, if your off-tank has nothing to run, maybe in Kratos, because that's fire damage, right? So that's another brief thought. And of course, the greatsword in the front bar has to be precise. And we have a bow setup example here. You can do the exact same thing, except with a BRP bow and master bow. BRP bow, definitely don't underestimate that so far. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully I simplified this, at least this part, not the previous parts. I think the previous parts, I lost probably some people who will watch this. But this part is pretty important because this is basically a basic template for you to kind of think about and say, oh, well, let's try it. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for Nefes and chilling. There's gonna be a written form of this, also linked in the comments and description below. If you have any questions, definitely join the ESO University Discord, and I'll also link to the spreadsheet again, as requested by so many people in the past. I just didn't want to share my last spreadsheet because it was way too messy. But yeah, thanks for watching, and see you guys next time.